It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you for being up early over on the other side of the world. I want to thank you, Professor Hong, for your introduction and for overseeing this important series of conversations. And I want to thank Professor Song Hasuk for arranging and making sure that everything ran smoothly and reaching out to me. And to all of you, it is a source of amazement for me to be here with you today. As it happens by chance, by coincidence, this afternoon, I was giving a talk to colleagues from Latin America, and there were people there from Mexico and Paraguay and Chile and Colombia. And it's amazing to me that now I can be here with you just a few hours later without even leaving my house. So it's a marvel. Now I see that you are sharing a screen. I also have the possibility, if you stop the screen share for a second, so I can show you if perhaps we can do it this way. I can show the full slide and the partial slide. So if it's okay with you, I will just use my own slides. Does that work?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That way I can move when it's time to move, and I don't have to tell you. So what I hope to do today is to elaborate a little bit more on the presentation on the text that you have, and then hopefully we'll have some time for discussion, for questions or comments. I'll be very pleased to address those. So let me begin by defining two key terms in the title of my talk. And as you see, the title here is Liberal Education Through a Core Curriculum, the Columbia Experience. So first, let me begin with the term liberal education. The idea of liberal education goes back to ancient Greece, where it was conceived as the education appropriate for free citizens. Aristotle described it as an education that was given not because it was useful or necessary, but because it is noble and suitable for a free person. So this education was distinguished from the education of slaves. It was education for those who are free. Those of you who read the text that I sent, you will remember that I made the point that in ancient Athens, the type of democracy they had was a direct democracy. So citizens sat on juries, citizens took part in government by occupying political offices. They served in the military. They voted directly on laws. Some of you who are familiar with Socrates, you remember that the jury that convicted Socrates was over 500 people, because all of the citizens of Athens had an opportunity to participate in the civic roles. So liberal education was conceived as the education that would be appropriate for a free citizen. So there was no area of knowledge, whether it's history or science, economics, philosophy, theology, psychology, religion, no area of human learning is outside of the scope of what is relevant for a participant in a self-governing community. That is, for a free, self-legislating individual. That continues to be, to this day, the guiding idea behind the liberal education, to equip an individual to exercise and enact their humanity in a free, non-instrumental way. Now, there are many dimensions to that. There is self-governance in the individual sense. being able to govern yourself, to organize your own psychological forces, your conflicts, your priorities, to be able to live an ordered, free life. This requires a certain kind of cultivation. So that's one aspect of it. There is also a collective aspect, because we don't live isolated. We live in self-governing communities. We live in communities that organize themselves in particular ways. So how do we equip an individual to participate in the most full way in the collective organizing of our lives? These are two aspects of freedom that are implicated, that are activated in the conception of liberal education. I will mention one other aspect of freedom that is implicated, that is presupposed in the idea of liberal education. And that is that an individual who is the subject of liberal education must also be free to some extent from economic compulsion. That is, there has to be a certain degree of freedom from the task of earning a living. If all of an individual's energy is dedicated to simply surviving, to simply securing the means of existence, to simply getting enough to eat, to simply getting a shelter, to simply having security, then you cannot pursue liberal education, because liberal education requires an extra degree of energy, commitment, bandwidth, as they say. So there is a certain degree of economic freedom, freedom from economic necessity, that is required for the cultivation of a free citizen. That is, if all of the time and all of the energy of an individual has to go to surviving, then there is no room to develop the faculties, the learning, the cultivation that is appropriate for a free human being. Now let's look a little bit at the history of the idea of liberal education. In this notion of liberal education that was developed in ancient Athens was incorporated into the medieval university in Europe. You know, among the most important contributions that Europe has made to humanity, and there are few, but is the creation of the university. You know, not every day does one create an institution that lasts 1,000 years, especially a European institution. So it's one of the important institutions that was created. Well, the medieval European university codified certain areas of knowledge under the term liberal arts. So the liberal arts were divided into two groups. You all probably know this, the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium encompass what today we might call literary arts. So grammar, logic, and rhetoric. The quadrivium encompass what today we might call quantitative sciences, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. It's interesting that music is classified as a quantitative mathematical science, because it has to do with the relationships of numbers, of proportions, of patterns that repeat themselves, with harmonies, with rhythms. Today, of course, we tend to think of music more like a non-numerical science, but that's not the way the ancients thought about it. Well, the trivium and the quadrivium form the basis of higher education. Every individual that was educated would have gone through this curriculum of liberal arts before they pursued some advanced study like medicine or law or theology. But all of this, the trivium and the quadrivium, these traditional liberal arts of the medieval university began to unravel, began to come apart in the 16th and 17th centuries under the epistemological changes that we associate with the term scientific revolution. We might remember René Descartes, who wrote in his discourse on method that he had come to realize that all of the knowledge that he had acquired in his university studies, that is all of the knowledge that Descartes had acquired in the trivium and the quadrivium, were uncertain and contradictory. That knowledge was fundamentally untrustworthy, unreliable. And on top of that, it was useless. It wasn't good for anything, he said. It was necessary, taught Descartes, to abandon all of that baggage and to start anew, to start again with a method of rigorous accumulation of facts, experimentation, synthesis, consolidation, and movement forward in knowledge. And in this paradigm, in this approach to knowledge and learning, Descartes was in the same vein as other thinkers like Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton, Galileo Galilei, and many others who forged a scientific paradigm that really gave us modernity and that today is the dominant paradigm in the university. So to say it in its most elementary form, the driving force of the modern research university is science. And at the beginning of the 19th century in Germany, the university consolidated and became a research institute, a research university, with the research ideal as the dominant method, the dominant ethos, the dominant idea of the university, over, superior to, the kinds of humanistic general education that we tend to associate today with the liberal arts, which in universities today continue to have a secondary role to the scientific research paradigm that is really the dominant thinking in the university. Now, we cannot question the success, the spectacular success and the power of the scientific paradigm. But we also have to recognize that this scientific paradigm, this epistemological regime, which values what's quantifiable, what is calculable, what is verifiable, what is reproducible, that paradigm leaves certain things outside. Because there are other things, human things, that resist this kind of understanding and epistemological representation. When the questions before us have to do with justice, with the good, the beautiful, the right, the very questions that orient our humanities, then technical knowledge is of limited use. In order to situate ourselves before the fundamental dilemmas of our existence, to navigate our internal worlds, we have to reach for capacities and intuitions that have as much to do with the intellect as to do with character. We have to tap precisely into capacities that make us free agents, ethical agents, irreducible to calculation. So general education, or liberal education, is the area of education that deals with what is not determinable, what it is beyond the scope of the scientific paradigm. Scientific knowledge progresses cumulatively. That is, it builds on the knowledge of the past and improves on them. So today we know better than we did 50 years ago how infections are transmitted. We know better about electromagnetism. We know better about climate change and 1,000 other things. That's how science progresses. But liberal knowledge does not progress in this way. Today, we don't understand better what it means to lose a loved one, or what it means to live while with the awareness of death, or the meaning of love, or of nobility. We don't know better today than we did 50 years ago. The latest war novel is not an improvement over the Iliad of Homer. And the same happens in art. Warhol and Rothko are not improvements on Michelangelo and Monet. Art does not get better with the passing of time. It's not like chemistry. So general education takes into account the constant accumulation and improvement of knowledge, but it is concerned with another way of knowing, a way of knowing that, contrary to science, does not progress cumulatively. It is a form of knowledge that, properly speaking, cannot be transmitted to the student. We can inspire the student, we can provoke the student, we can infect the student with a certain attitude. What liberal education looks to do is not to feed the intellect only, but to enrich the interior life of the student. Not only to prepare the student for economic activity, but to live a life of intellectual and emotional integrity, a life of self-reflection, and of a critical engagement with the world. So this is the origin of liberal education and why it has such a broad reach without privileging one form of knowledge over another. This understanding of liberal education has informed the evolution of the American college and is evident in the fact that most undergraduate degrees in the United States include some form of general education. That is, education that is not directly related to the major or specialization. So today, liberal education is contrasted with technical, vocational, or professional education. Liberal education is the part of a university education that isn't directly aimed at preparing students for a career. The part of university education that is not directed at a particular profession or occupation. Liberal education is that portion of education that we owe students by virtue of their humanity. The part of education that sees students not as professionals in the making, but simply as whole human beings, and that tries to equip them to face the human condition in all of its mystery and complexity. In American colleges and universities, liberal education is typically offered as required courses, often in the humanities and social sciences, that lie outside of the student's major. As the existence of the Korean Association for General Education and its International Cooperation Committee demonstrate, there is a growing interest outside the United States in the practice of liberal education and general education. So let me talk about my second term, the core curriculum. The word core curriculum is used widely and loosely to describe general education requirements of a college curriculum. But the term is also used in a narrower sense to refer to those parts of general education that are common to all students. In this sense, a core curriculum refers to courses that every student must take and is contrasted to distribution requirements, which gives students a choice of fulfilling their general education requirements from a variety of course offerings. So I use the term core curriculum in this narrower sense. Columbia was one of the first schools to use the term to describe its general education requirements, which was organized beginning in the year 1919 with the course Introduction to Contemporary Civilization in the West. Since the 1940s, Columbia's core curriculum has consisted of 5 courses, which I list here. Masterpieces of Western Literature and Philosophy, which is a year-long course. This is taken by every first-year student. This means, by the way, that every student who's beginning at Columbia, in their first week, every undergraduate, that is, this is at the college level. Columbia, of course, has graduate schools, medicine, law, business, architecture, PhD programs. So this is referring to undergraduates who are pursuing the Bachelor of Art degrees. The college students in the original Columbia College that was founded in 1754. Every first-year student, the first week of classes, is reading Homer's Iliad. That is the first text that is read by college students. So the entering class at Columbia College has about 1,200 students. So they are all in small groups of 20 students. So there are 60 some odd groups, sections, each one taught by a professor. And the first week they're reading the Iliad. And the second week, or the third week, the Iliad takes 2 weeks, they read the Odyssey. And they are like this, reading important texts. Sometimes they're called classics, sometimes they're called core texts, for the entire first year. That's literature humanities. Then there is another year-long course, number 2, Introduction to Contemporary Civilization in the West. That is a course that every sophomore, every second-year student takes, beginning in the first week with the Republic of Plato, and following the Republic of Plato with the Ethics of Aristotle, followed by the Politics of Aristotle. Again, every student of the 1,200 students is in a small group of 20, and they are reading the same books for the entire year, roughly at the same time. Then there are 2 other courses, Masterpieces of Western Art and Masterpieces of Western Music, that are organized similarly, although these are only 1 semester courses, but they begin from ancient art, in the case of art, from the Parthenon, sometimes even cave paintings, and move chronologically in the Western tradition to contemporary times. The music class does the same thing. This begins in the Middle Ages with Gregorian chant, religious chants as part of the Christian Mass, and move to the contemporary times. And then since 2004, so very recent comparative compared to the other courses, we have a science course called Frontiers of Science. Now, let me say that this curriculum is very, very old. So except for the science course that came in 2004, the other courses have been in place since the 40s, but the 2 early courses, Contemporary Civilization since 1919, Masterpieces of Western Literature since 1937. So these are very, very old courses. And they were organized in a time where a focus on the Western tradition was not really questioned. A focus on the Western tradition is simply assumed. If these courses were formed today, I would suspect that they would go beyond the Western tradition. And in fact, Columbia today has a requirement, a distribution requirement, not a core requirement, but a distribution requirement, where every student must take 2 courses in traditions that are non-Western. So whenever I talk to universities who are thinking of organizing core curricular program, I always make the point that today you would not replicate the Columbia program. You will come up with something that's more responsive to our contemporary understanding of how the world works. So the core curriculum remains the distinctive part of a Columbia education. And this program, which Columbia started in 1919, is the most important contribution that Columbia has made to American higher education. I give you a quote from Lionel Trilling from 1854, where he reflects about the importance of this model of education that Columbia initiated. Now, it has had a very big impact on American higher education in general. And one way to think about that impact is to understand a couple of other initiatives that were either inspired or came directly out of the Columbia experiment. Notably, a Columbia professor, Mortimer Adler, who began to teach literature humanities and taught, in fact, literature humanities together with Lionel Trilling, and kind of caught the fire, realized or became a evangelist for the idea of great books education, of creating courses in which undergraduates read important major works from the past and talked about them. And he introduced this idea to his friend, Robert Hutchins. Robert Hutchins at that time was the dean of the law school at Yale. Robert Hutchins began to read books under the influence of Mortimer Adler and to look at this model of education. And then Robert Hutchins was appointed first president of the University of Chicago, a major new university. And Robert Hutchins brought the idea of a great books curriculum and created, with the strong influence of Mortimer Adler, the core curriculum at the University of Chicago. Out of the University of Chicago, in turn, came a radical idea of great books-based education, a whole undergraduate college based on the study of great books. And that college continues to thrive to this day. St. John's College, which with 2 campuses in Annapolis, Maryland, and in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Harvard initiated a review of their curriculum and produced what is probably the most important book on general education in the United States, called the Harvard Red Book. Well, it's sometimes referred to as the Harvard Red Book, but its official name is General Education in a Free Society, published in 1946. That book, General Education in a Free Society, lays out the vision of general or liberal education that Columbia has implemented in its curriculum, as has the University of Chicago, the St. John's campuses, and many, many, many other institutions. Now, the core curriculum have changed and evolved in many different ways in many different schools. And I think one of the very substantial weaknesses of general education in the United States today is the dominance of the distribution requirements, the abandonment of the core curriculum properly. So let me end by discussing the core curriculum properly, as I call it, by looking at these, what I call the 4 characteristics of the core curriculum. There they are there, and I want to say a word about each of them. So they're uniform required courses. They focus on the study of primary texts. They are discussion-driven seminars, and they are all interdisciplinary seminars. So let me say a word about each of those 4 characteristics. And excuse me as I continue to drink water to lubricate my vocal cords. So the first characteristic, uniform required courses. The reading list is common. The course requirements and the extracurricular activities, all in common, are meant to give students a shared intellectual experience. So discussions begun in the classroom spill over into hallways, dining halls, dormitories. Through the core, the student body engages in a campus-wide conversation about what one of its founders called the insistent problems of the present. This campus-wide conversation allows students to build communities, equips them to talk to each other across differences of background and opinion, and allows them to see themselves as part of a human continuum that is larger than themselves and their particular interests. So there's this very, very powerful intellectual community that gets created. You know, if you imagine a first-year student at Columbia, like I was a long, long time ago, I had a roommate. You know, Columbia is a residential college, so people live on campus, and I had a roommate. My roommate was also taking literature humanities with me, but in a different section than me. So we had different professors and different classmates, but we were reading the same books. And the people who lived across the hall from me and the people who I saw in the cafeteria were all reading the same books. So it is an amazing tool to allow for communication, for dialogue, for cohesion in the student body. So the second characteristic is a study of primary texts, whether in philosophy, literature, art, music, sciences. Each of the courses is organized around the study of primary sources with almost no secondary readings. The Columbia program is very committed to the fact that students ought to encounter firsthand, directly, original works of art, of literature, of philosophy, and that they should hear the voice directly. They should read Plato, they should read Aristotle, not just learn about Plato, but learn directly from Plato, etc. Third characteristic is a discussion-driven seminar. Utterly important. Instead of lecturing, the instructor acts as a discussion leader, adding specialized knowledge only in places where it serves to advance group discussion. So core classes are conversations about foundational texts and foundational questions that are of deep and enduring human significance. Students learn to express complex opinions and to form judgments, to listen carefully, to engage in respectful but critical debate. There are things about our own humanity that we can only learn in honest dialogue with other people who are different from us. And the core classroom, by putting texts that raise fundamental human questions in front of students and inviting them to talk about them, really enriches their education in an incalculably powerful way. Fourth characteristic is interdisciplinarity, both in subject matter and faculty. The core is drawn from different disciplines. So the core does not introduce students to the disciplines, but to the fundamental questions out of which the disciplines arise. One really extraordinary thing that happens at Columbia, for example, is that every week, the faculty who teach any given course gather together over lunch to talk about the text that's being taught next week. So, you know, imagine 1 week is Dante. Dante is being taught next week in literature humanities. The faculty get together, they invite a Dante expert, perhaps somebody from the Columbia faculty or somebody from another institution, to give a 30-minute, 40-minute presentation about how to teach Dante to undergraduates who are reading it for the first time. The Dante expert gives a talk. And then the rest of the faculty, you have philosophers, sociologists, anthropologists, literary critics, experts in Russian literature, experts in English literature. All of them are coming together, historians, to think about and talk about how to teach Dante to undergraduates. It's an extraordinary conversation, and every week it's happening at Columbia in various courses. So there is this very powerful interdisciplinarity that comes with the implementation of a core curriculum. Let me end with another list. This is a list of 5 ways in which the core is unique within the research university. First, it has to do with the unity of knowledge. The core brings intellectual coherence to the student's educational experience. The core operates under the assumption that all knowledge is related, that this particular item of knowledge is necessarily connected and consistent with this other item of knowledge. The core sees knowledge as an organic whole where one part cannot be altered without affecting the others. In other words, things cannot be known in isolation, but in relation to everything else. Second characteristic is that the core concerns itself with the whole person of the student. The student as a developing human being, rather than as a future specialist or a future laborer, is at the center of the core classroom. The core seeks to educate the whole person. The end goal of the core is the flourishing of all of the human potentialities of the student. As W.E.B. Du Bois, the famous African-American activist and writer, historian and sociologist, he wrote that the true college will ever have one goal: not to earn meat, but to know the end and aim of the life which meat nourishes. Third characteristic is the focus on pedagogy. A successful core class depends far more on the pedagogical, the teaching skill of the instructor than on his or her expertise in a particular field. So inspired and skilled teaching is a constitutive component of liberal education. Without it, a liberal education simply does not happen. Only through an intensely personal and in some way special, intimate bond between the teacher and the student can the task be accomplished. And this is why the philosopher, not just the medievalist, can teach Dante, and the sociologist can teach Dante, and the Russian literary scholar can teach Dante, and the anthropologist can teach Dante, and the historian can teach Dante. Because what we are teaching is not our specialized knowledge of Dante. What we're teaching is from the position of being specialized readers. Our expertise that we bring is the expertise of a reader. We are expert readers rather than experts in the subject matter, because the subject matter is as broad as the entire experience of being human. We bring our own humanity, our experience, our scholarly skill, but we are not there to introduce students to our scholarly specialization. We're there to inspire and guide students in thinking about the fundamental human questions that we have in common by virtue of being not scholars, by virtue of being human beings. I already said a word about interdisciplinary dialogue, but that's a very unique aspect of the core, that faculty from different disciplines come together to think about and talk about a common goal of liberal education. Then there's diversity. In the United States, which, as you know, is a very diverse country, racially, socioeconomically, ethnically, religiously diverse, and which is full of tensions along this diversity. The core classroom is a place where we can harness the power of diversity, where we can benefit from the different perspectives, different backgrounds, different worldviews that people bring to think about the problems and the questions that we have in common. So finally, let me say that we find ourselves in extraordinary times, and that general or liberal education is more important today than ever. Tectonic changes in the way that we organize our globe are taking place. Tectonic changes in the evolutionary history of humanity are taking place. Tectonic changes in the history of the planet are taking place. These changes are happening with unprecedented speed, so that we can see them playing out even in the space of a few years. The world as we have known it is being transformed before our eyes. Those of us who teach young college students have to ask ourselves anew and ask urgently how we can best prepare our students for the challenges ahead. Our students will have to grapple with the predictable and unpredictable consequences of climate change. They will see the extension, possibly the dramatic extension of the human lifespan. They will interact with increasingly sophisticated forms of artificial intelligence that will rival and in some cases exceed our natural human capacities. They will have to face the dilemmas inherent in the genetic manipulation of human and non-human species. A true liberal arts education is our best hope of preparing students to meet these and other as yet unforeseen challenges. These are complex challenges, and it is because of this complexity that liberal arts education matters today in a new way. Technical knowledge alone is not adequate to prepare our students for the actual world in which they will live and make decisions. The liberal arts teach us to interpret, to formulate sensible answers to problems that admit no precise solution, to tolerate complexity and ambiguity, to reach judgments that are rooted in evidence, but take into account our values, emotions, and biases. The habits of reflection, deliberation, focus, skepticism, openness, and fair judgment that the liberal arts cultivate are in greater need today than ever. Liberal arts education is more relevant, not less relevant, because of the ways in which our world is changing. Thank you very much for your kind attention this evening, this morning for you.